All right, so everyone's here. It's time to get started. Welcome to the second day of the Computational Antitrust Conference. I thought I would be starting with a quick reminder as to what we discussed yesterday. If you were not with us, what we did is that we discussed the end game of computational antitrust, what is possible to achieve, the kind of safeguards that we need, how to structure antitrust agencies, how to change procedural rules, etc. Today, the idea is that we discuss practical approaches to computational antitrust. As I said in my closing remarks yesterday, we are scheduled to dive into different projects that will show us how to use computational tools in the field of competition law. So during the next 3 hours, you will learn about concrete results, but I think most importantly, you will learn about the methods that are already available in 2021. Whether you work in a law firm, in-house, for an agency, or whether you are a researcher. So to be very concrete and more specifically, the first discussion is dedicated to the use of computational tools and visualization techniques to analyze thousands of antitrust cases. The second discussion, in an hour from now, will explore the use of NLP, natural language processing, to analyze legal contributions and capture how market players understand the core concept of antitrust, such as gatekeepers, monopoly, etc. And finally, in 2 hours from now, the third and final discussion of the day will be dedicated to the use of machine learning in order to detect patterns in the case law here of the FTC, which are invisible to the human eye. So in a nutshell, today is dedicated to Antitrust 3.0 in action. So without further ado, let me introduce our first discussions. On my left, I suppose, we have Felix Chang, who is a professor of law and the co-director of the Corporate Law Center. He is also the associate dean for the faculty and research at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. On my right, we have Pinar Akman, who is a professor of competition law at Leeds University School of Law and the director at the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence on Digital Governance. And finally, we are joined by Erin McCabe, who is working also with Felix on computational antitrust and the use of computational tools at the Cincinnati College of Law. And we are joined by Gijs van Dijk, who is a professor of private law at Maastricht University and the co-director of the Maastricht Law and Tech Lab. So without further ado, Felix and Erin, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Thibault. Thanks so much for bringing us into these conversations. Thanks too to Alex Satropa and Monique Norquist and others at Stanford for organizing this. I think it's really exciting to be at the forefront of this application of computational law techniques to antitrust. So Erin and I are going to present more of a methodology piece. This piece was recently published in the Stanford Journal of Computational Antitrust. It's a project that grew out of a collaboration that the College of Law at the University of Cincinnati has undertaken with the Digital Scholarship Center at UC, where we're using topic modeling. It's an algorithm that maps the statistical relationships among words in a corpus of documents. We've been funded by the Mellon Foundation by a large grant, and DSC at the university has partnered with a number of academic units across the university to run topic models on a variety of research questions like pain indicators in medicine, citation of authors in biology cases, and even the placement of bone in archaeological excavation sites. So topic modeling can be done on a visual corpus as well. So our project, though, uses topic modeling algorithms on this platform that I'll show shortly that DSC has built to detect really latent patterns in a large body of antitrust case law. Let me begin by framing what I think has been up until now some of the obstacles to big data research on antitrust legal texts. So first, for a long time, there was a lack of easily accessible legal texts. Now I'm going to begin sharing the screen, and let me know if you can't see it. I think you can all see it. So what had happened was until recently, it was really difficult to extract a large amount of case law. When we had started this project a couple of years ago, we had negotiated with Westlaw and Lexis for like 9 months for licenses to do bulk downloads for cases. There's this really onerous process. And in addition to the license negotiations, it just wasn't really convenient to download a lot of those cases. So that all changed in the last couple of years because now we have the Case Law Access Project. And that's this partnership with Harvard Law Library and its Berkman Center in Revelle. And they've digitized almost every published decision in almost every US jurisdiction up until 2018. So as you can see here, that's about almost 7 million unique cases and over 1.8 million unique federal cases. And they make it really easy for scholars to download cases in bulk. You can see playing around their website, there's this historical trends function down here, and I've already uploaded this search where I'm looking for all US cases with the words antitrust and regulation. And you can see you can run some rudimentary searches on the Case Law Access Project. So that's been really helpful. What we've done is through the Case Law Access Project, we extracted 35,000 federal cases with the word antitrust in it. So that's a pretty large corpus, 35,000 federal cases with the words antitrust. And then the research question that I had began with was, how do federal courts balance antitrust and regulation? Because that's what a lot of my prior work was on. So then we downloaded a second corpus of legal texts from the Case Law Access Project, every federal case with the word regulation in it. And that's 306,000 cases. So it's this huge corpus. And later I'll talk about how we went ahead and filtered down those corpora to more manageable corpora. Now, I think the second problem is that for a lot of big data work on legal texts, it's with modeling. So that is that it can be really difficult to translate models into visualizations that the audience can grasp intuitively without a lot of statistical training. So a lot of this work has been done in the subfield of computational legal analysis. And that's projects that explore questions like how and whether you can model legal reasoning at all. And that's the subject of a lot of papers on these series of online workshops at UVA that Mike Livermore runs. So what Aaron and I have tried to do is to introduce topic modeling to antitrust audiences. And topic modeling, Aaron can talk about that a little bit more, but it's been around for a few decades. Again, it illustrates the probable distribution of terms and their co-occurrence within a data set. So what we've done is the Digital Scholarship Center has built this platform that uses different variations of topic modeling to show what the occurrence is or what the spread looks like in these two corpora that we've extracted from the Case Law Access Project. That is cases with the words antitrust and cases with the words regulation. We went ahead and we filtered down those cases a little bit more though, so that now we're working with two bodies of text. One is every federal case with the words antitrust and market power, and the other is every federal case with the words antitrust and regulation. So let me show you what DSC has devised. It's called a model of models visualization, and this is in the corpus of, you can see here, antitrust and regulation. So we further filtered it down to 2,720 documents. The antitrust and regulation corpus itself is 7,308 documents, but you can filter it down a little bit more on the DSC platform. They have the ability to get us words where or cases where the words antitrust and regulation occur many more times in a case, so that they're not just random results. So you can see that what the model of models view does, it excels in really big picture visualizations of how this corpus breaks down. So I should talk probably a little bit about some of the variations of topic modeling that we've undertaken and why we're starting with model of models visualization. So one of the key criticisms of topic modeling for many years is that you can get these random aberrant results. What you're doing is you're cutting and splicing cases across this really large corpora of texts. How do you know that how do you know that these results are useful when they're decontextualized? And so one thing that the model of models visualizations tries to do is it tries to get us greater context. So the basic point of this kind of model of models or multi-level visualizations is that you're running up to 6 different iterations of topic models and you're aggregating them so that you see them in larger and smaller context. Usually topic modeling gets you topics, but now we what we are able to get you is clusters of topics. And that's what you see in the right-hand panel. So you see here, these are clusters of topics. Again, each topic is defined by the most co-occurring words within that topic. And you can see some of those terms here. But what we've done is we've clustered those different topics so that they show up together. In this way, we get a little bit better macroscopic context to see how the topics come together. And what's interesting here is that when you look at the antitrust regulation corpus, you see that the topic clusters tend to cohere along sectors, so industrial sectors. Here, it looks like in this cluster here at the top, this light green one, it looks like some sort of an antitrust immunity topic cluster. Then later in this purple cluster, we see some sort of a class action cluster. If we go on down the line, you see that very frequently there's like a healthcare cluster. There's going to be here, there's a telecom cluster right here. There's a banking and financial cluster. There's some sort of a commission cluster, and many of these are old ICC cases. There's a patent cluster, and then there's another kind of evidentiary or procedural cluster. That does make some sense. It seems that when you're thinking about the balance between antitrust and regulation, some of the people who've done work in this area have said that it's really dependent upon the sectors. So it may very well mean that, when federal courts are looking at competition concerns in a regulated industry, that the way they wade through those competition concerns, it's really sector specific. All right, now I'm just going to go through some more of these visualizations to show you some of the added improvements that the Digital Scholarship Center have added. So on the left-hand side, you see this panel here, and the panel gives you the ability to pull up the top relevant decisions within a topic cluster. So you can highlight, this cluster here, and then you might get the top decision being the United States versus Visa. So in this way, what we've also done is, in addition to the macroscopic context, we also have a more microscopic context where you can actually begin to go through and pull up each of the decisions to read through those to see if the vocabulary that's used in the decisions really coheres with what you see as the top terms within each of the clusters or each of the topics. In this multi-level visualization, there's also a couple of other views that may or may not be as useful, but this circle view shows you certain terms and how they might cohere across the different clusters. Plaintiffs coheres across these two clusters. You've got permit, county. The other thing that I think is a little bit more useful is what is more, you might have seen in more of a word to vect type visualization where you are situating the clusters against this vector space visualization. This is the network view, which can show you the distribution of these topic clusters as well. Now, I'm just going to show you a couple more different types of visualizations, and then I'm going to backtrack and talk about some of the doctrinal generalizations we might have, and maybe some of the methodological criticisms, and also the checks that Aaron and I have undertaken to ensure that the results are robust. So another variation of topic modeling that the platform has created, this is the topic browser view. And this is less of a macroscopic view in that you don't aggregate the topics into different topic clusters. But what you can see, which I think is particularly helpful, is you see this little graph of the cases over time. So you get more of a historical view of what types of topics might have declined as importance, at least as a proportion of the overall corpus of text itself over time. So what's really notable is that you have the rise of these class action topics over time. You also will tend to see the decline over time of a lot of topics where you have the top cases or the top terms like commission, in particular the Interstate Commerce Commission. And this does seem to cohere with some of the earlier work that scholars in antitrust have done, more about deregulation. It's more of an imprecise label, but the concept of deregulation, that is, you're moving from this regime away from rate regulation and more into a regulatory regime where industry regulators are just trying to set baseline rules for competition. So this is the antitrust regulation corpus. Very quickly then, this is what the antitrust market power corpus looks like. Yeah, this is the antitrust market power corpus. What I think is interesting over time is you see the decline in importance of the tying cluster, and that might be for doctrinal as well as theoretical reasons. Doctrinal reason might be that over time, it's much more difficult to bring tying cases. Here, this is a stacked view, which shows much more easily, the relative importance of each topic in proportion to the cluster over time, where you see this real increase over time in importance of class action topics and also topics that pertain to antitrust litigation and evidentiary matters. Okay, so let me talk for maybe a couple of more minutes about some of the big picture, maybe some of the doctrinal or results, and then I'll give it over to Aaron to talk about some of the robustness checks that we've undertaken. So some of the less surprising results we saw over time are the fact that interstate commerce commission cases, so these real rate regulation cases, have declined over time. It's also not entirely surprising that we find clusters of topics grouped by theme. So for instance, you've got patent clusters, healthcare clusters, banking and securities, labor, class action clusters. Here, one of the surprises was that any way we ran the models, oftentimes there would be this little cluster of milk cases. And that just seemed really odd to me, why there would be this really milk cluster cases. It's here somewhere, we can see it a little bit toward the bottom, but there were all these milk cases. And I wasn't really aware of the milk powder cases, but apparently in past decades, there was a lot of milk powder antitrust litigation action that went on. Things to be aware is that when it comes to relevance, the way topic modeling defines relevance is really different than how we might think about the term relevance doctrinally or traditionally the way we do Lexis and Westlaw research. Remember that if a topic is comprised of terms that are most statistically likely to appear, then the top decisions are going to be those that are statistically most likely to reflect these terms. So it's a statistical gauge of relevance that's kind of different than the legal understanding. And the top cases that we find are less ones that have precedential value, but probably more statistical value. Here, I think I'm going to pause, stop share, and let Aaron talk about some of the methodology and robustness checks.
That sounds good. Thank you, Felix. I sent my slides in,
Yep.
but, oh, perfect, thank you. Whoever's out there. I think Felix covered most of this in his original, or in his section of the conversation discussing the grants, but the LDA topic modeling algorithm we use, I like to kind of phrase it this way as a big picture idea of what that algorithm is actually doing rather than getting into the formulaic composition of the algorithm. But essentially we're measuring words more, or assuming that words more frequently co-occurring across a higher number of documents in your data set are a part of the same topic. That's kind of the translation of what that algorithm is doing. But with that in mind, you have to keep in mind that topics are a list of words and not labels, and that each document has a distribution of those topics. So it's not one topic in one document. So, okay, but back to the original coherence metrics that Felix had talked about or led into this. We test models at the DSC with kind of a dual approach to testing those. So like Felix had mentioned, there's a lot of human judgment in these models, and we incorporate that subject matter expertise kind of at 2 points in our analysis of these models. There's the actual analysis of the models itself, but there's also the evaluations of the model's sense-making ability. Before we really get into the meat of what the model is telling us, we have to assess whether it's doing its job in a sense-making fashion. So this is kind of our first step. It's just a human eye. And Felix and myself come from very different realms. I work in NLP research and law, and Felix is in law, and that combined subject matter expertise allows for two different eyeball perspectives on our models. So we look for things like, do the topics have an inherent sense-making capacity? The example I give here, cable license television programming, there's a certain inherent sense to those words belonging together in a topic. So we can kind of go through the topics and check for that. We'll also look at top terms and topics. We use kind of a mantra at this point of affirm and complicate. You want a certain number of your expectations of the data set to be met. And then maybe later on add in nuance to that, but you want to meet a certain number of expectations. And then we also look for things like meta language, things like plaintiffs and defendants and case that occur kind of everywhere. We want to check for that. And that we kind of consider that language that's endemic to your specific data set. So we look for that and decide, does that prove our model is working? Should we remove those for stop words? Things of that nature. So that's the human judgment element that can be a little more subjective to combat any subjectivity bias. We also use coherence testing in a more algorithmic approach. And coherence in this sense is a metric that scores each individual topic by its degree of semantic similarity between the highest probability words in that topic. So this is tests we run across an entire data set, and we adjust the different hyperparameters of our algorithm across all of these tests. So the LDA algorithm that I had mentioned earlier that we use for this has two different hyperparameters that control how many topics can be in a document and how many words of that data set can be in a topic. So we can run this multiple times across the same data set and models at different topic counts. So 10 topics in a model or 15 or 20, and decide what are the best hyperparameters to get the highest scoring coherence metric there. For Felix's data set, we found that the range of coherence metrics was actually pretty tight. And it seems that case law as a data set compared to other data sets we work with at the DSC, like news media text or even academic journals, is a lot higher coherence scoring across the board. And I think that really speaks to the linguistic hyperstructure of case law. So yeah, and that helps us pick the best hyperparameters for a data set so we have a stronger, more coherent model in an algorithmic way and also based on our subject matter expertise. And we'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Right on time. I was sending you dynamite in the chat.
I saw.
But yes, thank you very much. I just want to make it clear to everyone that should you have questions, as yesterday, please enter the questions in the Q&A. We have 2 questions already. I think one has been answered, but I want to re-emphasize the question. In the meantime, Pinar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thibault, and many thanks to Professor Chang and Ms. McCabe for this presentation. Well, where do I start? I should probably start by saying that I'm a mere antitrust lawyer. And so there is not a lot I can say on the modeling, and I think that's been explained extremely well today to us. And having read the papers, so the thoughts I'm going to offer, I think, revolve mostly around what we as antitrust lawyers can learn from the findings. And I should note that I'm probably going to have more questions than comments myself. But if I may, I'd like to start by summarizing, sort of in my own words, I suppose, and in the author's words from the paper, what the paper achieves. And the authors should absolutely feel free to correct me if I'm wrong when I say anything about the paper at all. So the paper uses, and I'm doing this in the hope that this might help others like me who are not familiar with these models to understand almost in layman's terms what the paper is doing. So the paper uses so-called topic modeling, which is a form of natural language processing that depicts the probability distribution of certain terms over a body of texts. And here the body of text is case law. And topic modeling also shows essentially how words cluster around one another And therefore it's used to unearth patterns in the body of text that it's being applied to. And in that context, clusters show us the relationship between different topics, and the topics show us the relationship between terms that are being sought for in this body of texts. And the paper here aims to contribute to building the empirical foundations of possible reforms in antitrust by essentially offering us tools with which we can assess how federal courts approach certain, in this case, doctrinal questions like market power and like the relationship between regulation and antitrust. And to me, as an antitrust lawyer, this is the most exciting bit, because I myself have tried on several occasions to do empirical research myself, and I see this as the main missing piece of the puzzle in almost every aspect of antitrust, that we don't have enough empirics to work with. And therefore, I welcome and applaud the authors for actually providing us with this venue of research, which I'm sure others will be able to build on as well. So as has been mentioned during the presentation, there's a very large database of over 300,000 federal cases to do with regulation and 36,000 to do with antitrust, which the authors have eliminated, have used elimination to reduce to a shorter group of cases. And what the models that are being used then essentially do is to provide us with visualizations of cases grouped by certain recurring terms. And then that allows us to see the relationship between terms and then relationship, of course, amongst those cases. And there are three different types of visualizations used. One with multi-level visualization that we have seen, the tree and the circle and the network format. There are topic browser visualizations and the Python-based LDA visualizations that show us the distance or the proximity between different topics. And these visualizations enable us to more easily interpret the machine analysis of essentially what the algorithm finds. And what the authors seem to find is that, as again has been mentioned, that regarding market power, certain topics such as telecoms, health cases, tying patents, technology, and so on are coming up. And in the antitrust regulation corpus, we have terms and topics: immunity, telecoms, energy, banking, health cases, and interstate commerce commission as those featuring more highly than others. So thinking of sort of what we have heard and having read the paper, to my mind, well, at least I have two, I guess, types of questions to the authors, and those are really my comments. The first one revolves around what was mentioned at the beginning, namely that of decontextualization, which was said to be one of the criticisms of topic modeling that comes from digital humanities. And again, I'm speaking here as a lawyer and not as an expert in the method. And as has been mentioned also by Professor Chang at the beginning, this is really a methodology paper rather than a paper that presents the results in terms of the substance. And I note that there's a separate paper which I'd be very interested to read as well. In the context of decontextualization, the question I have, I suppose, is whether context merely means which cases are most likely to feature the terms that constitute a topic for the purposes of the research. And I guess by that, being a lawyer, to me, context means a lot more than I suppose what it specifically means in this modeling context. And I wonder what this model or what this strand of research can, if anything, or what machine learning can tell us about the broader context as we lawyers would understand context to a given case. So how much of, I suppose, how much of the context that's extraneous to the subject matter at hand could we detect by using algorithms or machine learning, if at all? And I don't know this, that's why this is a genuine question in that sense. And the research is absolutely fantastic in terms of providing us with a venue that would allow us to observe trends over time in case law, that would allow us to categorize terms and see, which categories of cases appear more often and when do they appear, when do they not appear. So it gives us I think, a very potentially coherent bird's eye view of a body of case law. So my question again, as an antitrust lawyer, is, well, what else can this research do? And particularly in terms of substance. So for example, can this type of research be used to make predictions in terms of possible outcomes? Can it be used to make predictions in terms of likelihood of success? And I have some more general questions as well. So for instance, who will be the most likely beneficiaries, in your opinion, of this type of research? And how do you think your model could be used in other jurisdictions? So what would those other jurisdictions need to have to be able to use, for example, your topic modeling, and to be able to, I suppose, transpose your study into their own jurisdiction? And one final question is, I suppose, what do we learn, or what have you learned in terms of the substance? So we have seen really the methodology in this paper. And as I said, I know that you have another paper in which you explain or you present the results on the substance. But as a lawyer, to me, it's also very interesting to hear from you. If you'd be minded to do that, to tell us about what you have found in terms of the substance once you have applied your methodology to the large databases of cases that you have. And I'm sorry, I have more questions than comments, but I hope they might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pinar. Gijs, the floor is yours to ask even more questions. To be sure, we are behind schedule in just about 10 minutes.
Excellent, I'll do my best. So thanks a lot for this invitation, and also thanks a lot for the presentation. This is really wonderful work. So when asked to comment on this, and I tried to pull up the paper, it turned out that the PDF file was corrupted. So instead of asking what the content was, I started looking online, and I encountered, I think, a previous draft which was much longer and which allowed to provide more context. So I'm basically basing my comments based on that, but it doesn't matter. The results will be the same. So in that bigger picture that you presented in that paper that I read is based on the large pool of these antitrust cases that you explained, try to perform an algorithmic analysis aimed to basically answer two doctrinal questions related to the measure of market power and the balance between antitrust and regulation. I think that's very interesting. I'll tell you why. It's because a lot of these methods, these LDA methods, but also computational analysis to law, kind of float in the air sometimes. So the idea of bridging the gap between computational analysis and legal questions, and legal analysis, I think that's a great endeavor. Overall, I think this is really a nice approach. We should have definitely more of these, and especially nice because I think you include a very honest assessment of what is possible, but also what is not possible and what are the challenges. And I think that is what we really need in this field. Okay, so the findings. Basically, information retrieval is probably the best use of topic modeling at this point, not so much for prediction, but to find the relevant information, and I very much agree with that. And also to suggest areas of overlooked scholarship or doctrine. I have a very bad cough, so I'm sometimes have a cough break. I hope you don't mind. I think you have more added value that you present. So I think the added value of automation should also not be underestimated. Even if your topic modeling results do not provide optimal results that the doctrinal scholars would find, you have to keep in mind that, you know, if you do this search and you have a sort of a pre-trained model, or at least you have a set parameters, then you can automate this process quite quickly. And even though you don't have optimal results, you still have relevant results that where you get results very much quicker than if you have to read the whole literature. And I think the visualization of relationships and trends is extremely powerful. And if you read the paper, and I would everybody to recommend to do that, then you actually see how powerful these findings are that topic modeling can produce. So some questions. I'll start with two minor ones. One concerns the selection effects. I'm not going to talk about which cases are included or not included. Those are the common, like the usual suspect questions. What I'm fascinated about, and to which I don't have an answer myself, I mean, in our lab, we conduct these similar types of analysis, is what are we actually studying? So we're studying cases, and cases are anomalies by default, you would say, depending on the field of law that you're working in. So in a lot of areas of law, the ordinary cases don't make cases because they're not special enough, and they can be easily be decided based on existing case law or existing rules. So where on the spectrum does antitrust law and these cases find themselves? Are all antitrust cases being brought to a court and do they lead to a case, or not always? And what does that mean for the interpretation of the results? And maybe to make it more concrete, when we talk about precedents, for instance, you see in these very nice topic rivers that show how, to what extent topics become more prevalent or less prevalent over time. Overall or compared to the other topics. There's also different ways of presenting that, of course. But the question here is, what are we actually seeing? Are we seeing a trend over time of indeed the topics that are becoming more interesting or more important and more relevant? Or are we also seeing an effect of that cases are just decided and then they're gone and there's no questions left that are interesting anymore? There's no way that computational analysis can decide it. I don't think there's any way legal analysis can decide that, but I think it opens up the door of asking questions, posing hypotheses, to kind of put these marks on this timeline, like, hey, here in 1984, this decision occurred, and you see after that, then the questions actually diminished. So to kind of like theorize what could be going on and what effects you could observe, and then test it against the data that you have. Also, the question of independent observations. Basically, if there's a precedent, you're going to use a previous case to decide a subsequent case. What does that mean? What does that mean for the selection of cases that are in your data set? Just out of curiosity, I'm curious to what extent these results are fair, and I'm not talking about fair in a legal sense, but fair in a computational sense. To what extent are these results, the software and the methods, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable? In the paper, you referred to some of these software packages and also even platforms that you could use. It would be great to learn as a community more how to reuse these elements, because what you're doing here in the field of antitrust, you can also put it into practice as to tort law or contract law or whatever field you're talking about. So learning that and sharing that, not only for this project, but also beyond, I think would be very valuable. Now, my main point is, I guess, again, that you're selling yourself a bit short. And that I think that has to do with doctrinal research, which you hardly define in your paper. You seem to connect it somehow to precedence and semantic similarity, but I think you can flesh that out more. So if you look at how doctrinal scholarship is defined and doctrinal research is defined, it's defined in very different ways: systematic exposition, analysis of consistency between rules, explanations, future developments. And if you narrow that down, you can actually look at for instance, case law analysis as already a field where you can pose different types of questions. You can look at precedents. You can see, like, okay, what are the relevant precedents here to see if the law is applied coherently. But you can also look at organizing and reorganizing case law in terms of factual similarity. So given a certain precedent or given a certain rule, to what extent are similar cases decided similarly? And then you have to basically, given the rule, look at the facts and the outcomes. So I think you can really turn with the facts, with the legal reasoning and the arguments, and then the outcomes as well. I mean, you can do that for other parts as well. I already said, like the policy analysis, proposition testing. You can formulate a certain hypothesis that has been forwarded by the literature, or maybe something that you think is going on or an expert thinks is going on. You can test it against the data, and I think it becomes more robust and more systematic if you do that. And I think you can actually improve your paper with that, to show that that the possibilities are much bigger than what you might think. When I zip over this, these are just more examples of the same. So how I would position it and approach it is, I think one element to look for is to retrieve legal precedents, which you could leverage the citations. You mentioned that in the paper that I read. You can leverage that also compared to and by using the semantic similarity. So, but for that, in order to do that, you have to look at the facts, the arguments, the outcomes, and you have to parse that. And what is problematic often is that these legal decisions are often badly structured for a machine. So you have to do that yourself. We tried it in our group for European cases. It's a lot of work. It's not very rewarding, but on the other hand, once somebody has done that, it's going to become extremely valuable. And then you can actually start doing what I was just mentioning. You can basically say, hey, if I have a given decision, can I look for a similar decision based on the facts? Can I look for the similar decision that uses the similar legal concepts? And then you can compare it against the outcomes. And if you can then combine it with legal citations, then maybe we're able to leverage that information altogether and to basically maybe even have a slider where you go to I'm more interested in the citation weights, or I'm more interested in the semantic similarity weights, but at least it allows us to kind of play around with the data and fine tune the results and gear them towards the questions that we're interested in. And then you can basically apply the topic modeling, zoom in per topic, et cetera, with these different layers as you presented. And I think it will open up a world of new answers to the same doctrinal questions. And that was it from my end.
All right, so no more questions, actually. Thank you very much, Gijs. I've never seen someone mastering the ability to mute yourself right before coughing. You really do that very well. So it wasn't a problem at all. I just wanted to mention that. I guess it's fair to give you a few minutes, Felix and Aaron, if you have anything to answer, and I suppose this might be the case. And then I've done my best to cluster all the questions in the chat and some of the questions that Pinar have been asking into 3 big questions. So hopefully we can all do all that in 15 minutes.
Okay, so maybe I can start by responding to some of the questions that were raised by Pinar and Gijs. And thank you so much for reading the draft so carefully. Gijs, in particular, thank you for looking it up on SSRI. And I know that the PDF was corrupted. We realized that after publication. But that was extremely useful. And there are a lot of questions in the chat and Q&A. Some of those are methodological. I can defer to Erin. I know she's responded to some of those. So maybe some of the bigger picture questions that Pinar had raised to begin with. So, what is the broader understanding of context? Can it be used to make predictions? Who are the beneficiaries? And what have we learned in terms of substance? You're right that in terms of context, we're thinking about it restructuring context to give it more context more algorithmically. So the criticism of topic modeling was, and a lot of these methods, a lot of these computational methods are in particular that you're splicing and dicing words, you're rearranging them, and that's devoid of context. And that has been problematic in a field where we're used traditionally more to close readings of text. That's what legal analysis is. So what we've tried to do, for instance, with the multi-level visualization is to give us both larger and smaller context, smaller in that you can actually look up the cases and begin to read those, to do some of the back-end checks that he had suggested, which is, hey, is this reasoning, are they coherent across a set of cases within this topic? Are the facts consistent? We're noticing the top terms. Is there some sort of consistency? So, and then also larger context in that, again, you see the 3 different ways that the multi-level visualization shows you these topics in clustered to give you larger, more macroscopic context. But again, that you're right, that is largely more algorithmic, although sometimes that does cohere with the doctrinal understanding when you see these topics that seem to align with our understanding of maybe the case law does splinter along industries. Maybe there is a decline over time in rate regulation cases or decline over time in tying cases. Can it be used to make predictions? Probably yes, but we've really steered clear from there. I mean, a lot of this stuff is unstructured and it's this black box. We've really tried to open up the black box through coherence testing. I mean, other things that you can do that I know in data sciences that they do is sometimes take random samplings and just to run topics across random samplings to see if the results hold. So until we can do that with a lot of confidence, we're really hesitant to make any predictions. Who were the most likely beneficiaries over some of these questions? I think that, definitely benefits to researchers. I assume industry, can probably work and vet the robustness of these methods much more quickly than we can, and they can probably take to a level where they can, and I'm sure they are making predictions already. But what we're interested in is offering a service to academic researchers. And in particular, what we think is particularly useful at the end of the day, something we haven't talked about yet is that in being as transparent with the methods as possible, and also in some of the paper, we run searches, parallel searches under Lexis and Westlaw, just to show that searches don't always return the same results, even across commercial databases that are using whatever their proprietary algorithms are. Lexis and Westlaw are notoriously opaque about what their algorithms are. And our hope is that we're trying to push them towards transparency as well. And all of the research questions, Heath, that you had suggested are exactly what we hope to do at the next step. It is a lot of work. A lot of the computational legal analysis, a lot of this work is kind of tedious. You've got to read the results, but it does have to be done. I think maybe I'll pause here again, just to say thank you again to both of you for such close readings and such helpful comments. I'll connect with each of you individually, but Aaron, I think there were a set of methodological questions that I will defer to you on.
And if I may, Aaron, I'm not sure if the participants can actually see your answers. I think they are just for the panelists. So
shoot, I'm
yes.
so sorry. Okay, I will copy and paste that to the whole thing. Hosts and panelists, you're right. Pardon my Zoom fail. So no. Okay, won't let me copy it. I will do that in a moment. So Jacques Van Bolognese, you had a question about clustering algorithms, and it's a good one because we do run 6 LDA topic models and then cluster them to create those topic clusters that Felix was talking about. So we use k-means clustering is the algorithm. So we run 6 LDA topic models, that's one algorithm, and then k-means clustering to create those topic clusters, that's kind of part 2. We had previously used affinity propagation clustering algorithm, and the results were not as visually cohesive, and also just had a long statistical tail of one topic clusters of hyper specialized language that really didn't give us a lot of actual meaning. And k-means clustering proved much more effective in all of our goals, and we didn't lose anything important in that transition either. Patricia Villa, I believe your name is, had a question about labels, and if we pre-label data before we go into this topic modeling algorithmic process, and we do not. So topic modeling falls under a term category unsupervised machine learning as opposed to supervised machine learning, which would require that labeled data. And essentially supervised with the label would say, this document is antitrust, and it would do that 100 times. And so the next time it comes across a case that has a similar look, you could say this is an antitrust thing. But the LDA topic model's goal is really about that latent relationship. So topics being lists of words that frequently co-occur, that is in the algorithm itself built from the data that we're giving it. So there is no training data set that the machine is learning on. It's learning while it's going through the documents themselves and building those statistical relationships of word co-occurrences. So there is no pre-labeling data. We're really looking for that latent relationship. I believe there was another one. Let me know if I'm missing any other ones.
Several, those questions were related to the type of algorithms. So I guess you answered them all.
Yeah.
Indeed, another one which disappeared was very technical. I couldn't understand the question, and so maybe you will retrieve it. But let me move on to the substantial parts. I'm wondering, and that's one of the questions that Pinar asked and Giuliano as well. Do you think that what you've done is solid enough in a sense to be used for policy guidance? Or, should you work at the FTC, would you be rather careful right now as to whether you would use the data to say, okay, we need more of those cases because we're not doing enough, or, what would you do with the results?
At this point, I'm not sure that it's solid enough. And, one of the things that I was thinking about recently, I attended this conference recently where Doug Melamed had asked the question of, antitrust law is just all over the place. Maybe what we have to do is just streamline it so that we get back to the basics. And he had two propositions for what we really need to do. And so when we were looking at the cases, I took another look again with a view toward that, which is to say, are there trends that we can observe over time that can cohere with that can show us whether or not we can get to that endpoint, which is to clarify antitrust doctrine or not. In the more concrete example of market power, I had thought that the decisions would be all over the place, and I think to some extent they are. But we do see, at least in the way of the structuring of the topic, some sort of coherence where we do see topics that are breaking out, where you have industry-specific topics, where you have rises and declines over time of these topics. And again, point well taken earlier from some of the questions of whether that just meant that you had more decisions and then they were just decided and there wasn't very deep analysis. I think all that is to say that there's still a lot of questions that we have to sort through right now. And I don't think we're at a point where we can offer that much policy guidance right now. Maybe eventually we can get there, but there's just so much here. This is an area that's replete with questions. I think we just have to explore a lot more to get more comfortable before we can get to the policy guidance.
And to this point, it seems that indeed, from the outside, in a sense, it is hard, because I was surprised by the result that you show that, the trend for tying cases is declining, when in fact we thought that this was the #1 practice, and it still might be. But if you are not working at the FTC, it might be that it's declining because you've decided 10 years ago, let's forget about those cases and focus on something else. Or it could be that internally that you've been looking for tying cases, and in case there is decline, it might mean that potentially there are less of such cases. So you need also to know, the kind of policy you've been implementing in the inside. And that relates to another question that Faith was asking. Do you think that this type of methodology could be used throughout the world? And, to be very specific, what about an agency with just a few cases, right? We know there are some antitrust agencies who just were created a few years ago. What would be the kind of, the amount of cases and data that you need for your analysis?
Yeah, so let me take the first part first, which is, can this be used all over the world? Now, when DSC built this platform, it was on some of the packages that other computer scientists and digital humanists had created, like Ben Mabie and Andrew Goldman. So some of those visualizations are taken from those platforms. So it might seem that the barriers to entry are rather low, but you still have to have money to be able to create a platform. You still have to have the technical know-how to be able to apply those packages, even if they're free and open source. So we had started, I think we were much more, at least I was much more optimistic about the democratic nature of this technology, in particular now that you can get cases pretty easily through the Case Law Access Project. But then as I started thinking about it some more, my personal view is that it's not, there are some barriers to entry. It does take some money. It does take some technical expertise. So it's not like in any advocacy group or consumer advocacy group can easily replicate this stuff. And also I'm particularly conscious of what this means for university research, because this is funded by grants. So initially the Mellon Foundation had given DSC $1 million and then they re-upped. That's a lot of money. And so I've been also concerned about what this means for the future of research in particular, as law gets away from sort of its humanistic grounding and more toward computational, but that's all questions for another time. And then the second part of your question, Thibault, was what is the sampling of cases? Aaron I can defer to Aaron on this as well, and you can chime in, but I think that this tends to work with larger bodies of cases. I don't find it particularly helpful with a small pool of cases. So I'll give you an example. I had run some visualizations early on for cases with the word Trinco. So just because, this big case Trinco on the balance between antitrust and regulation, we got maybe a couple hundred cases. I just didn't find that particularly helpful.
Very interesting. Maybe, yes, Aaron, I will give you one of the final words, and then we'll go to Gijs and Pinar. But one question we had in the chat relates to the ability to use that to enhance the search engine, such as they exist. So I'm curious as to whether you work with the private sector, if you got maybe Westlaw or LexisNexis got in touch with you. Maybe you can't say if that's the case, but what would be the commercial application of all that, if I may ask?
I know previously we've worked with patent law offices to explore commercial applications to patent searching with topic modeling, but I don't believe anything came of that. I think there's still something of a skill set gap because there is this analysis component that not everyone's prepared for. And then to the document count kind of aspect of it, I think Felix is spot on. When you're in the realm of a couple hundred documents, it's better to pick a different algorithm, really. Instead of topic modeling, we go down to a word level, and oftentimes we'll use things like word to vector, which is more at the word level relationship rather than document level. So when I get into smaller realms, I kind of tend to go towards that space a little better to help us with our analysis. But yeah, Felix, I don't know if you've had other interactions with commercial applications or anything. I assume LexisNexis wouldn't be keen on it, but maybe that's just me.
That's what I assume as well.
All right, Gijs, you do have a minute, like in a presidential debate, to convince people to vote for you or to conclude.
Nobody will ever vote for me, but I'll give my 2 cents on this. So I think with the remark of pooling resources is, the implicit remark of pooling resources, that's very important. These projects are project-based. When the funding runs out, it's difficult to maintain the software, whereas it's actually valuable for other projects as well. So I think there goes a long way to include the community and to build a community for this topic, but for computational analysis of law in general, and to kind of see like how we can contribute to each other's software, each other's packages, so that most of it stays alive beyond the death of or the end of the individual project.
All right, thank you very much. Pinar, the last word is yours.
Thank you. Just to pick on what you said and bring that together with what Gijs said and what I was saying about context, I think context seems to be really important in the sense that we are looking at a sample of reality, in essence, that is the outcome of certain parties having made a decision to take a particular case to court. And even there will be differences between jurisdictions where you have to go to court in an antitrust enforcement system, as opposed to where you don't have to go to court to prove an infringement and so on. So context, and whether, for example, the authority decided that, okay, we haven't done any tying cases recently, let's do some tying cases, or vice versa. I think those things are potentially really important when it comes to being able to use this model to make predictions and so on. And the other thing is I'm really intrigued by this statement around Westlaw and LexisNexis. And if they had been regular platforms, we might have thought maybe they're engaged in self-favoring because they'd rather see these other results. But I'm sort of almost a bit disturbed by why they're top result when you search tying and market power is so different to what you're finding. I think this is probably the topic for a different conversation, but I find that really interesting and I'd like to perhaps know more about that on another occasion. And otherwise, just if this is the final word, then I'd like to congratulate the authors again. This is really as cutting edge as it gets, I think, and I'm sure this will lead to many more other fruitful building up on this particular research in different papers and so on. So congratulations and thank you.
Well, Pinar, Gijs, Aaron, and Felix, thank you very much. Just a quick note on the Westlaw and Nexus. If they were indeed sanctioned for, doing some self-preferencing, they will never publish the decision, and so we'll never know, I suppose. So in any case, thank you very much for fruitful conversation.